Good morning or afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Mary Keeley, President of the Division of International Special Education and Services, and I'd like to welcome you all to our last virtual event in a three-part series featuring our esteemed panel of DISES members doing amazing work around the world. Today, they'll be addressing our theme, DISES Highlights Inclusive Practices Around the World. And today you'll participate in discussions with our panelists who have done work in England, Singapore, India, Kenya, and the United States, and hear about their experience and perspectives on this important theme. You'll have opportunities to interact with our panelists in a facilitated discussion, have access to relevant resources shared by our presenters. As we begin our program, I'd like to familiarize you with our mission to frame our session today. The Division of International Special Education and Services, or DISES as we're known, is a division of the International Council of Exceptional Children that all of you, or many of you, are part of, in addition to many other organizations that makes us so collaborative. Our mission is to promote international knowledge, exchange of special education practice, international research, communication and collaboration, human rights, and advocacy to those who provide services for individuals with disabilities. We sponsor forums for professional development, such as this one today, in addition to international conferences, roundtables, and other events you'll be hearing about. And by doing so, establish networks that foster international associations and connections in our global community. We hope that you'll make some of these connections today as a result of your participation in this event with us. In a few moments, you'll meet our esteemed panelists who will lead the discussion about global research on inclusive practices and instructional strategies around the world, and also share their insights about challenges, innovations, and resources from their perspectives in different countries. Very exciting. And now Rebecca Jez, our hostess, and member at large for communications, will introduce our esteemed panelists. Rebecca.
Thank you so much. So we'd like to start with, and I'm going to pin here, Dr. Sonja Assani, who is an assistant professor with the DISES School of Education at the Tata Institute of Social Science in Hyderabad, India. And I do apologize if I've mispronounced anything. So her research interests are in the areas of inclusive education and special educational needs, equity and social justice, child rights, and social emotional well-being in schools. She has been an investigator or co-investigator on several research projects and is currently carrying out studies on students' social, emotional, and learning and challenges in human resource development for inclusive education. And I feel very privileged to have her here with us. I was introduced to her from my colleague, Maya Kaliampur. So we're very lucky to have her today. Thank you. Our next speaker will be Dr. Rabbi Rabunga, and she is an assistant professor in special education in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction in the College of Education at University of Massachusetts in Lowell. Her research focuses in early academic and behavioral interventions through a multi-tiered system of support. Dr. Rabunga's target population is students with or at risk for emotional and behavioral disorders and or learning disabilities, with a focus on culturally and linguistically diverse learners. Rabbi has over 20 years of experience working with individuals with disabilities. 16 of those years were spent working directly with students with disabilities within grade schools. And more personally, she's been working with me on the social media and a few other research projects. So I'm very happy to have her here as well. Our next speaker is Dr. Zachary Walker, and he serves as the head of department for the Department of Psychology and Human Development at the University College London Institute of Education. He's a senior fellow with the Higher Education Academy, and Zachary is recognized as an expert in individualized and organizational learning performance. In the last 10 years, he's worked with educators and policymakers in more than 30 countries on issues of diversity, inclusion, inclusive pedagogies, and innovative practices. And I met him many years ago in different CEC events and groups, and we are so happy that he is joining us here as part of this DISES event today. So we're going to start with having each one of the speakers actually introduce themselves a bit and tell us a little bit about the work that they're doing in countries outside the United States. Dr. Assani, would you please begin?
Yeah, I start. Thank you. So yeah, like Rebecca, know where I'm from and also the institute that I'm associated with. A little more about the professional background. So I've worked with children with special needs as a volunteer teacher and then as a junior headmistress for about 2.5 years. That's where my whole understanding of how inclusion doesn't work and how some aspects of it work within the Indian context started getting much more clear. I mean, this was practical experience that I was getting. So that's where I also decided to move on to study the area better and moved to do my MPhil from Cambridge and came back to India and did my PhD. The areas that I largely focus on within inclusion is more to do with classroom management, classroom practices, and the social emotional learning aspect of inclusion. Rather than talk about the deficiencies in the practices. So I'm trying to get a better grasp of how when we make children feel that they are a part of the classroom, that they belong to the classroom, how much more better those inclusive practices work. So that's largely my area of interest.
Thank you. And Dr. Rabunga, could you tell us a little bit more about you? Oh, you're still on mute.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Rabbi Rabunga, and as I was introduced, I'm at UMass Lowell and now the School of Education. But a little bit about my background. I started my teaching career in Kenya, and I was a high school teacher. And believe it or not, it had nothing to do with special education. I taught religious studies and Swahili. So that's what I taught in high schools. And then moving to the United States, I obviously wanted to continue being a teacher here, but then I could not teach religious studies and Swahili. So I had to find something that I'll be able to teach. And then that's how special education and I were introduced. But in being part of special education, it was quite eye-opening for me, specifically because of how I understood special education before coming to the United States. So in Kenya, back then, and largely still now, when we spoke about special education, we're really thinking about 3 areas specifically, and one of those being people with physical disabilities, or people with visual blindness, visual issues of blindness, or deaf or hard of hearing. Those are the areas of disabilities who are majorly covered in Kenya, and there were special schools where students went. If a student had one of those disabilities, they went to special schools. So I did not have any interaction with disabilities, but one thing that was so fascinating in studying special education in the United States and eventually becoming a teacher here is what we call the high incidence disabilities here in the United States. That is quite missing. It's a big gap in Kenya, and I'm sure in many other countries in Africa and other areas. There is no training for teachers or educators to provide support for students who are specifically with emotional and behavioral disorders, or students with specific learning disabilities. And it really brought back memories of classmates that I had in grade school who could not read all the way to 8th grade and don't know support. And understandably so, because there's no training for teachers to provide those supports. So what eventually happened is those students were retained over and over again, and then eventually ended up dropping out because, again, no supports for them. And the same case with students with emotional and behavioral disorders. There's no training again for teachers. Students got punished, corporal punishment, and parents, you know, it was like a united end between the schools, and the parents tried to discipline them. But really, in studying those areas here in the United States, it was clear to me that those students did need specialized support, which teachers were not equipped with. And so in my work, generally here in the United States, what I'm doing is obviously working with students with those areas, high incidence disabilities. But my research, the work that's specific to support that gap is looking at immigrant parents and looking at the ways to help them support and better advocates for the students. Because again, those two areas have stigmas. There are stigmas related to them, and parents are not forthcoming. They're not easily able to share that their children have those disabilities because of the stigma that comes with it. But then knowing that being in the US, those parents from those countries, they do need to be first and foremost advocates for their children. And for them to be able to do that, they need to understand those disabilities and realize that it's something that it is not, that should have a stigma, and they have to be at the forefront of helping their students get the support they need so that they can be productive adults in their lives. Because again, those, as we understand, many of students with those moderate disabilities go on and become great people in society if they receive the support they need. And that's a little bit about me.
Thank you so much. Dr. Walker.
Hi, everybody. Mary, you kept saying that there's going to be esteemed people here, and I'm looking around and I'm hoping they're esteemed, because I'm clearly not, but I'm glad you all are here. So especially on a Saturday, thanks for being here. My name is Zachary. Again, I think it's fantastic that so many of you have showed up to talk about this, and some from around the world. I actually am from America. To start, and moved around quite a lot. So my first teaching job was also not in special or inclusive education. I started as a general education teacher and just was kind of always drawn to the underdog. And I also, I played basketball at Penn State, and a lot of my teammates, and when I started coaching basketball, I would work with these student athletes who had kind of been pushed through the system because of their athletic prowess. And I knew that they were smart because I could see them remember plays, and they would, you know, they would know every place they needed to be on the court in a specific time. They would know all the moving parts, and then they would walk into geometry class and it would fall apart. And so for me as a teacher, I began to think, I don't think this is a learning disability. I think it's a teaching disability, right? And so I really became more interested in how we taught and what we taught, and went back and got a master's degree in English language learning, and continued to work in the US. And then I decided to go my PhD at the University of Central Florida. Some of you might know Bill Winke and Lisa Deeker and Trey Vasquez and that whole crew. So don't hold them against me, please. But had a really good experience there. During that time, I moved to France and I taught in Paris for a year. And then I also took a job in Switzerland, in Geneva, working for the UN on policy. And so that was one of my first experiences really looking at if you're familiar with the term weird, Western, educated, industrialized, rich countries, with non-weird countries. And so really looking at what's going on in the rest of the world, which was fantastic and brilliant. After Switzerland, I came back to the US, and then I taught my first faculty job in Singapore. So I spent 6 years in Asia. And worked all over Asia. And again, was I've been very, very blessed to have the opportunity to work with just some fantastic educators around the world. And some of the best teachers I've seen, I think probably like many of you, are in some of the worst conditions. And I can talk about those stories later in a breakout room. So I'll give you a couple of examples there. But I think now I moved to London 3 years ago, and I'm, as was mentioned, the head of department for psychology and human development. And I also was running our Master's in Special and Inclusive Education program. And one of the things about being, and this is the, I mean this in the best way possible, this is the part where I plug our university a little bit. Well, the Institute of Education has been ranked #1 in the world for the last 8 years. So if you look at the rankings, it's like us and then the Harvard Graduate School of Education and then Vanderbilt and Stanford and Cambridge and Oxford and all those. So one of the nice things about being at a program like that and in a city like London is on our master's program and master's in special and inclusive education, we usually take 40 to 50 students a year. But for example, last year we had 16 different countries represented. So you get a really good picture of what's happening in other places. Obviously, that's only based on, self-reported criteria, but we have literally students from all continents and everywhere. So that's quite exciting. And what I'm really looking at now is both leadership, how we lead inclusive practices, and policy, because while I am a teacher at heart, and I love that, I have become more and more convinced that it is about policy and leadership and finance. And so that's where my heart and my head sits at this moment. So again, thank you for being here. Really honored to be able to speak with everyone today.
Thank you so much. I love the stories about the journey that we take to where we are today around supporting the learners in different places around the world, and how that's part of each one of our journey is also part of our personality and what we can bring. So our next question is, can you tell us about some effective inclusive practices that you've seen around the world? And maybe just choose one or two. And this time we will start with Rabbi.
So, when I think about effective inclusive practices, I really have one place to point to, and it's the United States. United States, with our own other issues, it's something that we can proudly say that we are doing a good job overall, and that's why we have a lot of other people in other countries looking to us. But as an inclusive teacher, obviously, I had great experiences just providing support for those students who do not need to be separated from their classrooms, that just need a little push, maybe just pull them out a little bit for a few hours to remediate the specific skills they need, then push them back into the general education classroom so they can receive the education that they need alongside their peers. So, and that is what really has helped me with thinking through countries like Kenya that do not have those supports. And so some of the work that I'm doing preliminary, it's in very preliminary stages, it's partnering with some universities back at home and creating a basic general introductory course to be provided to all candidates, teacher candidates are going through that, given that a lot of the government might be too far in supporting students with moderate disabilities, but equipping the teachers or pre-service teachers with the knowledge and the skills to even just identify that these students do need support and something different from what they are providing as teachers is a good place to start. And so that is the work that I'm looking at in the next few months to do.
Thank you so much. Dr. Walker?
You switching up threw me off. Sorry. So I'll just give 3 tips for now, and then I think we can talk a little bit deeper about a couple of other things that I see as the biggest issues. But as far as and I know I think many of the people on here are involved. If you're involved in teacher education, so you train teachers, could you just give me a wave or a nod, or you can even throw me something inappropriate if you'd like. So the thing is, thank you. The 3 things I want to point out are really more for teacher educators. And so the first practice is now this is not practice all over, okay, but there is a teacher training institute in Iran, and every teacher education class about disability is co-taught by someone with a disability. Mm-hmm. And so they make an effort that they go out into the community and find someone who has disability to co-teach with them, even if it's not an experienced teacher. So that person is there the entire time and works with the students to say, this is what I go through in my daily life. Sometimes they're a trained teacher, sometimes they're not. And I think that's a really, really interesting way for us to think about how we could potentially, be better representatives of the experience. The second example is from Pakistan. And one of the things that they're trying to institute now, they've introduced it in one university, but they're trying to spread it much wider, is that they have for teacher education programs, no matter what your subject matter is, science, math, whatever, they have 10 mini modules about disability that are focused on inclusive practice. So they're not in full classes, and you don't have to take all the full classes, but they're little mini modules that students can take as they go through their teacher education program. And so as many of you know, depending on where you're at in many of the states, the only requirement in the US, in many states, is that you take one class on disability during your whole entire teacher education program. And many times that is only focused on legislation, just don't get sued, right? So it's not actually focused on good practice. And so these mini modules are actually focused on good practice. And so again, teachers can take, which ones they might be interested in out of the 10. The third one, again, and by the way, all the countries that I'm mentioning here, I'm not saying that they're incredibly inclusive countries, okay? I'm just pointing out some good practice that I think we can take from no matter where you are in the world. In Singapore, 10% of the general teaching force, however you want to define that, every year goes through a three-day professional development on inclusive practice. So 10% of the entire teaching force every year goes through 3 days professional development about inclusive education. And that might include behavior, it could include autism, it could include specific learning disabilities, it could include any of those things. But I think those 3 practices are things that we could really look at. How could we do those? Maybe not even at the national or state level, depending on where you are, maybe not even at your whole university, but how could we do them in localities? I think each of those are really interesting ways that people have found to do good practice in other places. So I will hand it back now and hopefully be able to talk about this stuff a little bit more later. Thanks.
Thank you. And Dr. Assani.
So a little background about the institute that I work with to be able to situate my the practices that I'm going to talk about. So I don't teach teachers per se. I'm more engaged with the Masters of Education course, which is not really training people for teacher education specifically, but for other aspects like curriculum development or policymakers and things like that. But we also do some in-service teacher training. So the diploma courses that we offer, short-term diploma courses that we offer. We have a tie-up with the Afghanistan government, the previous government that was there. And before this whole Taliban thing started there, we had students coming in from Afghanistan to also attend some of these courses that we were offering. And there's a specific B.Ed, M.Ed integrated program also that we offer, but that's from the other campus. And we're doing blended mode and online teaching and all for those things. So the whole structuring of why these courses started off, like we didn't have these courses earlier, and we specifically moved to have courses in inclusive education. In fact, with Maya's help, we've also now created another course. It's like a 2-part course that students have to take over 2 semesters. And in the first semester, the only thing that they will be engaging with would be the aspect of attitudes towards inclusive education. I say only thing, but that's such a big and such an important part of setting the ground for teachers to be able to take inclusion forward. So they're spending like 4 credits doing just that. And then in the second semesters, when they move to the practical aspects and engaging with the field and things like that. Now, this whole idea of pushing for these courses, one comes from the fact that we realized that there's so much talk about inclusion and good practices and all of that, and we're trying to tell them constantly what kind of things you should do. So it's like bring in UDL and bring in the RTI and all of these bits and pieces that we are giving them constantly. But the bottom line is that the teachers are not empathetic enough. The attitude for inclusion is something that's missing, which is why I think a few things that triggered us to get into this was that in one instance, in one of the studies that we were doing, we saw children in a class, a whole lot of commotion happening and everything. And one teacher comes in and says, this is because there's a child with dyslexia in the class, and this child just disrupts the whole class. But the same class, the same group of students, and another teacher comes in, and this child settles instantly with her. And we are very keenly now observing of like, what? Definitely there's something this teacher is doing because of which there's this change that's happening. And it's interesting that she's not pushing this child to get his spellings right. At no point has she told him that you need to, by heart your spellings, write them 20 times, 100 times to make sure that you learn the spelling. She realizes that spellings is not his thing and she should just let that go. So every time he's getting stuck, she's just mouthing the word and he lip reads her and he knows what the spelling is and he's moving forward and he's not distracted, and hence he doesn't want to disrupt the class because he's enjoying what he's doing. In another instance, there's this girl in the classroom who the other teachers say that this girl is slow, she's lazy, she doesn't want to work, all of those labeling that teachers end up doing. But interestingly, again, it's this teacher that realizes that the girl is a little apprehensive about things. And yeah, there are certain things that need to be addressed, but she changes the strategy and she starts giving her tasks to do in the class. Clean the board, carry the books, can you help me with this? And the fact that she's getting that kind of importance from the teacher is good enough for her. She takes charge, she feels the need to start getting onto things, and her learning outcomes improve. Interestingly, nobody's diagnosed her. They don't know whether she has a learning disability, whether she is a slow learner or not. The teacher says, I couldn't be bothered. There's a way to address the thing, and this is what I'm going to do. So that's where the whole, the reality of what UDL should be is something that she could bring in without getting into characterization and labeling and all those things. So it's a whole lot of these kind of practices that made us realize that we need to move from not just identifying the good practices, but also understanding why the teachers being able to do these things. And that's again where that whole attitude thing comes in, and we realize that within the Indian context, at least, there was such a strong need to, focus on that aspect and help teachers to understand and start believing in inclusion and not just talk about it or not just push them with the thing that, you are duty bound to do it, or the policy demands that you should do it and hence you should do it. Those things we realized were not things that were working, and this was a better mechanism. So similar kind of experiences that we've heard of from teachers now after they've been part of that diploma certified course that we do, because it's a short-term course. So we've been able to mend things on those counts. So yeah, I think those were some of the things that have helped us to move on to also realize what kind of teacher education we should be working on then.
Oh, I love that. I absolutely agree. Really examining attitudes, creating the supports for teachers in pre-service while they're, doing their student teaching, and then in service after they're in the field is so important. Creating those individual supports and partnerships with universities and schools and for the training and the co-teaching, the mini models and the professional developments are all really important. Next, we're gonna switch up the order again, but we're gonna have you share some instructional strategies that teachers are using that really support all learners. Dr. Rabunga, would you go first for us?
So I will share just one strategy. Maybe people in the United States who work with students with severe disabilities are familiar with it, but it's got like a reverse inclusion, where students that do not have disabilities spend their time in the separate classrooms with students with disabilities and learn from there. And I just kind of touching on what the other speaker just spoke about, that goes away a long way with helping with those attitudes towards teaching, especially for the peers, classmates. And so I did that when I was a classroom teacher, but I did not know that that's what it was called until later on. But what happened is that I had a self-contained classroom with students with moderate to severe disabilities. And I mean, my students really had intensive needs. And within the school, I was an inner city school where the regular students, they had a lot of issues themselves. And what they would do is go call my students' names, retarded and things like that, and in the hallways and things. And so what I did is worked with, at that time it was my assistant principal, and as a way, instead of giving them a different kind of punishment, their punishment was spend time in my classroom. And it was really great to see those students' attitudes change, and they became the ones looking out for my students. If we're in the cafeteria, they would buddy with my students. And it was just like a 180 from thinking, they're retarded, all this, and then they become the support system. So, and then I realized it's done on a large scale, reverse instruction, where a group of students who are in the regular classroom go into the self-contained or separate classrooms, and we have co-teaching going in there. And so we are not having the students, because some of those students with severe disabilities, they might be in a position that they cannot be included because of various reasons, the wheelchairs, or they do not have the equipment in the general education classroom that would effectively support them. So having these other students go in is really helpful.
Thank you. And Dr. Who are we on this one? Sorry, Dr. Walker. Oh, I'm sorry. We're on the third round. So yeah, am I right now? No, I've confused myself. Go for it, Dr. Walker.
Would you like to go? It doesn't matter to me.
Either's fine. You can just go ahead.
All right. Well, so when we talk about best practice, this may be shocking. I'm going to give you something a little different, an alternative here. Because within our department, a colleague of mine named Rob Webster, Dr. Rob Webster, and I'll put the name of the study in the chat. And by the way, you're here in London outside, if you can hear all that. It's very exciting. Did the study, I sent it to Rebecca. She can forward it if she'd like to. The largest study in the world, one of the things we've done in our department, is the largest study in the world on teaching assistants, teacher aides, study aides, et cetera. And so we've collected information from many countries in the world. And what we figured out is that teaching aids are rarely used correctly. And because of that, they actually hurt children's performance. I will say that again. They are actually damaging to kids' performance because teachers don't use them correctly. And if you think about, and again, I'm not going to ask anybody specifically, but if you think about the programs that many of you teach on, or that you've seen, or that you've evaluated, or whatever, how many of them actually really make an effort to talk about how they use teaching assistants? It's very little. And yet, and by the way, let me also say, my father spent the last 20 years as a teaching assistant. He was an aide. He was a teacher's aide for kids with disabilities in a high school. And so he can give me, it was a school that I used to teach in. So I have lots of firsthand knowledge here. And he talks all the time about how, teacher aides show up and they want to do stuff, but there's no development. They're kind of, they're given some paperwork every once in a while to do. They're classroom babysitters. Rarely are they're used to what is possible for them. He would talk about, he had to go through, because he was a school employee, had to go through the evaluation every year and sit down with one of the assistant principals or one of the leadership team. And it would literally be a 2-minute meeting. Yeah, here's your evaluation. Good job. We're really glad to have you, which was basically keep showing up on time and wear the right clothes and you're okay. you know, and you think about all these people that schools employ. Now, again, I know that some of them may not be great, but we've got all these people that are employed by schools, and yet we have so little training, so little development, so little expectations of them. And so the first thing I would say for best practice is, what are you doing with your teaching assistants? You know, what are you doing with your teacher aides? You know, are you training them? Do you set high expectations for them? How much time are special education coordinators in schools actually spending with assistants, not teachers themselves? Right? How organized are the schedules? Is the consistency? Or are they just they're the substitute teacher when on call? Right? I think all those things are things that we really need to look at. And the MITRE report is a massive, massive, massive report, again, looking at the practices around the world. And I think that that's one of the big things at the school level that we can do a much better job of. Because again, one of the things I try to look at is what is we as individuals can do, because I think it's often to say, oh, well, that's a political problem, or, oh, that's, you know what I mean? It's a structural problem, an organizational problem. Well, I'll tell you this, if you can get one or two of the teachers in your local schools to start maximizing the use of their teaching assistants, that will make a massive impact on what happens in at least those classrooms. I'll bring up, do I have time to do two more, Rebecca? Quick ones, I promise. The second thing is, you know, I've been in this game, and many of you have for a long, long time as well. And many of you are younger too, I understand that. This comes down to politics and legislation. The best thing that we can do is vote and support candidates who, you know, are into special needs and will support individuals with disabilities and inclusive practices. We can talk all the time about lack of teachers and retention, but if we don't put laws in place where funding is a priority, we're not going to have the right kind of teachers in the classrooms. We're not going to be able to pay them. We're not going to keep them. If we don't have laws that actually move things forward for individuals with disabilities, the best practice and the best intentions in the world are not going to matter all that much. There's the ethical argument, and then there's the legislative argument. Unfortunately, what we know throughout time is the legislative argument always wins, right? Things often don't change until there's legislation involved with it. So we have to become more politically active. The third thing, and I sent this resource around as part of the resources for this particular webinar, is, you know, follow the money. There's 3 ways that most inclusive systems are funded. And if you read that article, it's quite interesting to look at how that happens around the world. And we can, again, if we have breakouts, we can talk more about that. But I think follow the money and see where the money goes and how things are funded. And that makes a massive, massive difference, because I think, like many of you, people go into this field because they're passionate. So why don't they stay in it? Most of the time it's because they're not trained, there's not the right legislation, there's not good funding, and those things come down to politics and money, right? So I think we have to, some of the best practices are actually focusing on those things.
Of course, you gave us homework. No. Thank you. Dr. Assani.
So within the Indian context, aspects such as assistive technology, special educators, it's scarce. A huge population of our students are actually in what you call the public funded universities, the government schools, basically. Private schools are picking up or are coming into demand now, more so for the reason that the government aided schools are not teaching in English medium, and English is becoming important now, and private low fee paying schools are doing whatever they do, but they're doing English medium education. So there's a big shift also that's happening to these private schools. So we had the Right to Education Act passed a few years back, which meant that now children with disabilities were legally, schools were bound to make sure that they did admit these children into the mainstream schools. So inclusion in the Indian context is, I would say, very different from what's happening in the developed countries. It's more of physical inclusion restricted to the primary level. Students do not move on to the middle grades, forget secondary grades and higher education and things like that. There's a whole lot of homeschooling where parents can afford to do that. Financially, economically well-off parents are managing to do that. But there's this big divide that's there on counts of that teachers do not have also, like what Dr. Zachary is saying, they're not teaching assistants. We've got like multi-grade classrooms, one teacher managing children from various grades and various kinds of concoctions that are happening. So some of the things that have worked in our context that we've seen teachers, also I would like say there are, there's a very small number of teachers that are motivated to carry inclusion forward now, given the circumstances that they are in. Also, teachers' pay is problematic. There's so much that's happening. But the few things, the simple things that have actually helped teachers is just doing collaborative teaching, collaborative learning, some amount of scaffolding that's there. Peer groups have seemed to work quite well. And these work in early years because when children's attitudes have been developed right from the beginning, they're more receptive towards their peers. They do not worry about differences then. So then they are ready to take people forward. And in those cases, it's these kind of practices which have worked. We do recognize the benefits of assistive technology and also how they can be detrimental when not used, but there's so little that's there. So many schools that don't have internet facilities and electricity is problematic. So a whole lot of technology-based tools cannot get used. Things that we take for granted of like, having text being read out and all are things that hence are difficult to take through in our settings. And hence, I've seen that these simple things which probably are coming from a general classroom and not necessarily about inclusion are actually things that have helped the teachers at least get inclusion going and some learning outcomes being met. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I also want to mention in the chat, we've had some additional conversation about the importance of training. Our TAs and our school staff and personnel and the respect and also more support for the advocacy and really looking at politics and funding. So thank you all for those who put some ideas in the chat. I want to thank our speakers also for talking about the importance of the collaboration and scaffolds, but also the difficulties that happen when we don't have access to all of the resources. That is a true challenge that we encounter around the world. Once again, the idea of changing the stigma and becoming loving and engaging and supportive educators came up. The politics of it and following the money, I love that because I do think that you can find kind of where the community's priorities are when you see, and I know that there's some famous quote around that, but when you see how well teachers are paid, then in a country, then you can see, where that country is focused on supporting their youth. So we're just going to have you go through one more round, and this is just for any other things that you've thought of or that you wanted to maybe bring up before we break out into our groups. Dr. Walker, did you want to start us off?
Yeah, this is a surprise one, so I don't have much new. I will say, I think Sonja's points about AT are really important and assistive technology, but I will also challenge us. Because again, as I look around, I see many of us serve a certain demographic here. I taught my first online class in 2005, not 15, 2005, so 16 years ago. And you can go back and look at the literature. The first online classes were actually offered in the late 80s. And I think I put it earlier, I'm a member of ISET, which is one of the CEC divisions, and have been a huge advocate, as you mentioned, Sonja, for the possibilities of technology for a long, long time. And yet so many teachers, because they personally don't feel comfortable with technology, would never allow it in the classroom. We would never, if a kid rolled up to the classroom in a wheelchair, say, oh, no, you can't bring that in here. But a kid rolls up with a device that can help them learn, and we often say, no, 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 put that away. That's not allowed. I'm going to collect that until the end of class. And I think we have to really think about what that means for a lot of our kids. The second thing is, along with that, I talked a lot about the benefits of teaching online, because there are a lot of kids around the world, and you mentioned the Indian context. You know, again, take that kid in a wheelchair who's cognitively able and incredibly smart, but can't get to school because it's not paved roads, right? Because there's rocky roads and his wheelchair can't get there. We put stuff online, now that kid can learn. And yet, until COVID, people were so resistant to put anything online. So I think part of our job as special educators is to be the innovators. I always tell our students two things. I said, you have to be the most popular person in school, right? Because every teacher's got to like you, because they're already going to maybe think your kid's trouble or hard to teach, or, you know what I mean? Like, the kids that we work with are the hardest ones to work with. So if you're also not liked, that's a real problem. So I tell my teachers, you have to be the most popular person in school. Everyone's got to love you, right? When you walk down that hallway, your affect, your attitude arrives 5 steps before you do. So it better be smiling and happy to see people. You know what I mean? Because if it's not, your kids have no chance. The second thing is, I say you have to be the innovative pedagogists. You have to be the most innovative teachers in your school when it comes to pedagogy, because it's up to you to find the ways and then teach everyone else those ways, whether that's technology, whether it's a strategy for dyscalculia, whatever it might be. You have to be the most popular and you have to be the most innovative. And if you can do those two things, we can really help kids move forward.
Thank you. Dr. Assani.
Just something that came to mind reading the comments. So somebody put up a thing that kids are the least judgmental. I think that largely comes from the fact that for kids, everything is normal. And as we grow, we start having these conceptions of what normal is. Again, coming back to the Indian context specifically. So as part of the master's course that I teach, I do a workshop which is a compulsory workshop. Now, again, in the Indian context, inclusion is just starting to become a compulsory course. Barely like 3 years back or something, where every university is, got on to the wagon and is taking inclusion, trying to take inclusion forward. So this is something that we do. It's compulsory. It's a 3-day workshop and they have to do it. And Dr. Walker said this earlier of, I think, an example of Pakistan where people with disability are coming in to teach. So we try to make sure that at least a resource person in this workshop is somebody that is with a disability and is coming in to share their experiences of inclusion and educational experiences and things like that. And it's interesting that these are like 20, 25-year-old adults, and they do not know how to behave with a person with disability. They say, oh, okay, this person can't see, this person can't hear. What do I do? How do I behave? They are socially challenged. And the simple reason being that we've not given our children the opportunity to engage with the diversity that's there. There's this exclusion that happens even in the community. Now, again, you need to remember that within the Indian context, ramps or seeing people on a wheelchair or a person with disability in the public space is just starting. It's not a common sight. And for many people coming from probably small towns, it's just not something that they are used to. So for them, the basics of like, how do I greet this person? How do I engage with this person? Will they mind it if I say something? It's so difficult for them to be able to just strike up a conversation or to be in a classroom with somebody who is a person with disability. And I think that what Dr. Walker said earlier, it's so important that schools, when we talk of inclusion, are not just looking at inclusion on the context of children coming in, but also the role models in the forms of teachers or educators, staff members, or so many other roles that people fill up in schools. Also have that representation, and how far they are able to take inclusion is also something I think like we miss out on considering, but has large consequences for how we shape attitudes towards inclusion.
I love that. Dr. Rabunga, do you have any last comments?
I'll just pick up from what Dr. Mark just shared about the teachers and having them being able to, you know, not to be socially challenged, but to be able to interact with all kinds of students. And I'll go back to what I started with, talking about the students with moderate disabilities. To me, when we're talking about inclusion, technically, those students are included. They are in the general education classroom. They don't go into any separate classrooms, but then they're just there in body. They're not receiving those critical supports. So it is important as we talk about inclusion to go beyond having students in those general education classrooms, but also giving them the support they need. But that starts with the teachers being equipped to be able to do that. But so where that begins is with teacher preparation programs. And again, that is where I look, especially for countries that are just catching up. And I would put Kenya in that category, that teacher preparation programs take the mantle in leading the charge, and the government and the money, as Dr. Walker said, will hopefully catch up later. And that's the work that I'm looking at doing. And another one thing that I can talk about is the relationship piece. I think Dr. Walker, you alluded to that, where, you know, having the teacher being being the most popular person there, but it's just not the same. You know, here in the United States, when I talk to my students, it's always about that relationship with their students, relationships with their parents, the families. It's really key. And that is something that is also missing, but for countries that are working to support students with disabilities, it's a critical thing for teachers to be able to do that. Relationship building, not only with their students, but also with the families from which the students come from.
Thank you so much. I love these ideas of relationships, building trust, you know, the innovation, and also the social constructs that we have and we develop as we grow older. I am now going to share my screen, and Jagnu is going to tell us a little bit about the resource list that our panelists have put together.
So I am going to put a link in the chat. And what we did was we asked all our three presenters to give us a list of resources. And so you will see, you should have those list of resources. And they are basically a list of, there are certain websites and there are certain articles and stuff that you can download and read, but it basically talks about all the different things that our presenters were talking about. And one particular one that stuck out to me is by Dr. Assani, the one that she put, the first one, the National Education Policy. And I want to highlight that one because one of our previous presenters, Dr. Indumati Rao, has been instrumental in supporting this work. So it just, all these resources are pretty amazing. So I just want to thank our presenters for this list. And you can read them at your leisure. So thank you
so much. So now I'm going to break us all out into groups. And in our groups, we have a recorder for each one. And we just want you to be able to take some time to talk about inclusive practices at the primary and secondary level and instructional strategies. And so before we move into that, I'm actually going to share the link, which is editable, if I can say this, editable. And so everyone will have access to add to this slide deck, and then also have access once we leave to these ideas that are being shared. So I am now going to open up the rooms. Okay, let's see who we have in here. We've got the right people. Okay, so got a few more people that are joining rooms, and our group will get smaller and smaller, but Okay, so this looks like it's getting closer to ours. Nicole, I signed you, right?
Yeah, but I need to get the link first. You went, okay. Yeah.
And Alice, I put you in the room with Nicole, so hopefully you can help kind of monitor that room.
How do I go back now?
You should be able to go down to the breakout groups and see.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And Clara, do you have a link to the slide deck?
I'm not seeing it. I'm on my phone, which is part of it.
Oh, I was saying Clara. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. There we go. Okay, so first of all, thank you once again, Rabbi. This looks like it's going to be our breakout group, and there we go. I just have to move to the other screen. So did anyone want to start off of our discussion or anything that stood out for them?
I'll call out Dr. Chiari because she's I'm looking at that name and I'm thinking she's from Kenya. Dr. Chiari, I apologize, but I'm gonna call you out, and you can tell me you're not from Kenya, but your name looks Kenyan to me. I don't know if she's there.
So Rebecca, did you want me to pull it up? I'm sorry, I just got it.
Yeah, could you maybe record for this group, and I'm going to check on the other groups.
Yep.
Sure everyone's good. Okay, thank you.
Got it.
So now I feel comfortable, and I will leave, and this group can facilitate. So thank you.
There she is, Dr. Chiari. I see her.
All right. So how are you all doing?
I'm doing well. I called you out because I
started out in my career working with deafblind, multi-handicapped, mainly rubella, children from the rubella epidemic. But I have been a deaf teacher, a blind teacher, itinerant, education diagnostic, a principal, been many roles in life, and have taught at the James Madison University in their education programs. But currently my biggest thing I do is not only a lot of early childhood things with classroom interactions, using the class tool. I observe and I train on those tools. But I work with a nonprofit called F&E International, where I have been going to Nicaragua since 2009 and working with families and schools there with children with special needs, and have since 2018 have started doing things in Peru in the Sacred Valley, rural areas up in the rainforest. And we're just now getting a project started in the Dominican Republic too, so.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Who are you picking, Cheryl?
Oh, let me see who's on my list. Patty.
Hi. Well, let's see. Where do I start? I started out in PE many years ago, and then decided to go into adapted PE. In Louisiana, I was actually in Jefferson Parish for about almost 15 years. And also was involved with Special Olympics. And then Katrina hit, and about 2 years after that, I ended up in Texas and tried to get a teaching job in Texas, and that didn't work. So I picked up special ed positions, like maybe somebody was out for 2 months. So I worked in RTI, and then whenever a special ed class needed a sub or so, I popped in there. And then eventually I moved on to Qatar, and I've been here for now 10 years. I have 2 masters, one in adapted PE, and the second one is in special education, mild moderate, from Cutcher University. And I have been trying to get involved more with special ed and disabilities, because in Cutcher, somebody wrote about in the cultures, in Cutcher, many of the Arab people feel like students who have any kind of disability is a bad mark on the family, especially a mom. So now they're opening up more to realizing that they need help, and that it's not that they need to get rid of the stigma. Although we did have the Paralympic Games here a couple of years ago, and after the big opening ceremonies, most of the people that came to the Paralympic Games were the families and the supporters that traveled with the athletes. So they're still not really fully understanding about what special needs is and people who need extra support. My school, as I put in the chat, one school has learning support people. Our school doesn't, but I'm now on the committee to try to write the policies to start getting more support for the students. And as a matter of fact, I used to work in the early childhood, and students that I see coming through with problems, I get them into my class so I can at least try to get them some help. Unfortunately, like they call them learning assistants. Some of them have teacher backgrounds, but not special education backgrounds. So then you've got to explain to them how to deal with the children. So that's kind of where I am now.
So I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to let you know, we're going to be coming back. I'm in the West Coast, so it's 10:06 right now. We're going to be coming back somewhere close to 10:20, but just wherever your time zone is, kind of move that there. And Jugnu, you're okay recording and everything from what your group is talking about? Thank you so much. Okay.
I agree because if you, it's like, you know, when they said labeling, parents blame themselves. So you have to try and bring it in a way that they won't blame themselves. They want to buy into and want to work with you. So if you put it up like, oh, the child have a problem, they start to look at themselves and say, I also have a problem. So you have to soothe how you deal with it. I agree. Yes.
That's very true.
Hi, I just want to let you know I've jumped into your room, and first of all, I love these wonderful ladies who I've met, many of you. But I wanted to let you know. So I'm in the West Coast, so it's 10:07 a.m. right now. We'll be jumping back into the main room somewhere around 10:20 to share out. So if you can make sure to have, I think Nicole is recording, but have somebody that's willing to share about your discussion and everything. So I just wanted to let you know that. Thank you for letting me interrupt.
All right. I just wanted to, quickly introduce myself since Sonja, we're interested in knowing who's in the room. So I've been in the field also, like Evelyn, since 1979.
Those are the things that resonate with me as well. As far as how do we start to make those changes? And I know all of us in our research and our practice and our training here are doing so, but how do we make this a more global effort? And I'm just going to put a plug in for what I'm doing. I'll be president of DISES next year. And that's my big, huge push, is that how do we get a seat at the global table a little bit more so as an organization? So don't go too far away. There's my plug.
Yeah.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, can we get a real quick group picture? And then I also
Not me. I'm going to put my mask back on.
Okay, if that's what you want.
No, I have students coming in my office. So
okay.
I have to, I don't know what I'm doing. Okay,
1,
take it.
2, 3.
Okay, now I can
All
put it
right,
back on.
and then I wanted to let you know it's 10:08 a.m. here in the West Coast, so we're going to have about 12 more minutes or so, and then if you can have something ready from someone from your group who's willing to share out about where your discussion went and any great points that you were able to get. So,
okay. Thanks, Rebecca. I'm typing into the
document.
the document. And basically, I'm just trying to write in some of the things that you all have been talking about. I'm going to switch over a little bit. So does anybody want to add any more to the whole group discussion on just improving inclusive practices or ideas other than I've got removing physical barriers, teacher training?
See people here. And second point I just wanted to make was because I work very closely with the government education departments at the grassroots level. In fact, last year during COVID, because everything turned online in India, we reached out to 8,000 families of special needs children who are from the poorest strata of the society. And that was through the 800 special educators of one of the states in India. And we reached out to them through mobile phones because laptops and other online facilities were not available to them. So we know what Dr. Walker mentioned about special educators making themselves popular. I've been working very closely with special educators in India, and they are one of the very badly treated teachers, unfortunately, and they don't have proper payment. There's no job security. They're hired on contract basis, like for 6 months, 1 year. So they don't know if they're going to be there next year. So it's very difficult to incentivize them, but we are doing that work. And fortunately, one positive thing that I notice is we go and do advocacy with the education departments. And there is increasing interest. They are noticing us. They are noticing the need to work with, empower these special educators. So that's it from me.
Thank you for joining us, Nina. I'm glad you're here. I think this is how we do it, right? One person at a time. Debra, I think you are last, but certainly not least. So where are you from? What's your story? Talk to us.
Thank you. My name is Debra Tamaklo. I teach in Pennsylvania, Millersville University. I teach special education, but I'm originally from Ghana. And your presentation really hits home because I work with families right now back home to actually design low-tech assistive technology to meet the needs of children with disabilities, just because we don't have the technology, we don't have the means to do the high tech. So even here at Millersville, I have like sewing machines and stuff here that my teacher candidates help me to design low-tech assistive technology. We take it back home, and sometimes I do it back home. So I would welcome ideas from everyone regarding low-tech assistive technology and how to meet the needs of students with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Debra. Yeah, I know Millersville. I actually had I graduated high school in Pennsylvania, and so a few of my friends went to Millersville. So, well, we've been naughty. I'm not sure that we've actually given too many tips at this point because we all like to talk, right? So I think one of the things in our we probably have 6-7 minutes left, maybe 5, maybe 2.
Yeah, about 7, but I can give a little bit extra. I always lowball, so.
No, I'm no mathematician, but I think there's 8 of us on here. And so that means I've already given my best tips. If I could ask everyone to give 1 tip or something that has really stood out to them, that would give us 1 person per minute.
And what are the problems there and things like that. And eventually it comes down to just this simple thing that in the primary years, when their child has been in a school, they've got a lot of support from the teacher and the peers. And when teachers have been encouraging, there's this parent who told us about how the kids used to fight to eat with this girl because she was on a wheelchair, and it was so fascinating for everybody that she's on a wheelchair. They wanted to be they felt she was extraordinary, and they wanted to be her best friend, and everybody was out to help her. But as the girl grew older, she couldn't continue in school because the problem being that post pre-primary or primary, schools say, no, sorry, like it's too difficult to take care of you. And if parents accept that the child has a disability, then invariably the school will also next say, okay, you need to withdraw the child. So the whole problem, like, also goes to the extent of then you not having access to a mainstream regular school for your child. But the beautiful stories that parents come up with of just the peer support and how that works so well for them. It's interesting that there's so much actually, like, there's so much support and so much learning that the kids can have, but we somehow just push it out and don't give it enough space for it to bear fruit that would actually be beneficial for everyone.
It's interesting in the US, we actually have laws that say that every child has, the opportunity or the right to learn. Nobody can be pushed out. How well they learn, how well they do after they learn, all those things are still not where they should be. No. But for the last 42 years, we've had these laws, right? 43 right. years, or maybe 46 if you counted from the date it was actually passed. So sometimes I wonder whether, it's the stick or the carrot that gets the job done, right? The laws require you to do things, but is it, if it's not done with some level of commitment and compassion and conviction, things happen in name only. You can say a kid is included because the kid just happens to be sitting in that room, whether they're actually learning at a high level, whether the expectations are high for the kid, whether the teacher has the skill set to work with the student, whether the kid actually masters and is proficient in content before they move to the next grade. Do they graduate with a degree that's actually useful and knowledge that really helps them get somewhere? All this stuff is still TBD, in the US. So sometimes I wonder, having a law in place, does that get the job done? No. That's a foundation, that's like a bare minimum requirement. But then from there on, there's the skill part, there's the will part, there's just a lot of parts to make things happen.
And advocacy groups, like CEC. We need advocacy people, and people, I think, I always tell, I work with older students most often, these are your rights. You are going to have to, if you're going to college, wherever you're going, I want them to have that ability to stand up for themselves and to advocate for themselves. And I want their parents and their families to be able to advocate for them. And what happens is when we start children at a young age, and I've seen it with my grandchildren who are now in college, but that child in their kindergarten, first grade, third grade, fifth grade classroom, they don't want that child to leave. And when someone says, well, he might have to leave, I've seen kids actually advocate for other kids or try to help, or it goes with them to college or when they go out in the world. So kids who have fewer disabilities or whatever, normal, regular kids, whatever, they can learn advocacy skills also and learn the value of having that young lady. I had kids who had behavior problems in high school, and they fell in love with Jenny, who had Down syndrome. So they became kind of her protectors. She was a tiny little girl. And when they went on the senior field trip, Jenny wasn't invited. And it was my students, with emotional and behavior problems, who went to the principal and advocated for Jenny to go to the senior field trip because she was a senior. And that's probably one of the best things those are my rewards for doing this kind of work. And seeing, these bad boys and a couple of bad girls say, she has the right to go. She could stay with us, so there are good things that come from it, I'm sorry. Get a little carried away with it.
Sure. Do you mind if I jump in? I know I'm not officially part of your group, but I think that, you know, and Sonja, you brought this up when you were speaking about the fact that, you know, so much of the stigma is actually the social constructs that they're not innate. You know, kids love other kids, humans love other humans, and then we're taught to make them other. And what an impact that has for people who are then considered the other. And I think, you know, this really speaks to our calling, our humanity calling, on how can we kind of remind each other and empower our students, our families, our communities, our teachers to really start unpacking or fighting against this othering of different folks. And so thank you so much, Evelyn, for sharing that story. Sorry, I couldn't just stay quiet on this one.
Well, it's my passion. You know, I've been doing this for a long time, as have other people here. And, you know, it does become a passion when you see what can happen. You know, so at any rate, that's my thing.
So I'm going to shut the rooms to come back in 2 minutes or in about a minute or so. Can you make sure that, I see that other groups seem to they have stuff added to their slide, but if you could have something added to your slide, or at least somebody who can share out for your group, and you'll have about a minute to share out the summary of what you talked about. Okay.
I wrote the notes down, so.
Okay, if you can add them to the slide, that would be awesome.
Which slide, which one am I adding to?
11, slide 11.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I mean, a lot of places for sure. I'll click it up, so take it off. No, thank you all so much. And I tried to jot down as many ideas as you all were sharing, and we'll please speak at when we get our group back together and have that conversation. So are we ready, Rebecca?
Yes, I'm bringing everybody back in 2 minutes. I was trying to give just a little bit more time to organize the responses, because not every group had been
typing them in like we have, like we were the
yes,
group.
you guys, you all, not guys. Of course, this group is fantastic at getting everything done. So
what can I say? No, we had some great conversations, and really, I think one of the things that I love about our community, our diocese community, is that the passion that everyone has and shares, because we really want to make what's going on out there in the world, you know, better in some way, shape, or form, especially when it comes to educating children. So it's awesome to hear. So thank you for letting me write the words down. Your thoughts and ideas. Anything else that you want me to add, I will do so, or say so in the when we get out in the big group. I'll put a plug now for Breckenridge. You'll see it.
We'll have
coming up.
Yeah,
that's right.
Super excited. Sad that we're not in Dubai, but over the moon that we're going to be hosting a global leadership summit, where I'm very hopeful that some of the time that we spend in Breckenridge will really be coming up with some other ideas moving forward globally. And that's going to be my push. And I know Nicole's there with me too, as president-elect too. And we're going to make that happen. So we're super excited to be hosting the summit there.
You're talking about a global summit, right?
Yes.
Wow, that sounds real good.
Yes. We wanted to call it not just a conference. We really want to have some actionable things come from it. Whether we start on some other mission statements, some other opportunities where we can build more capacity as more of a global voice. I'm really interested, and so is quite a bit of the team, in creating some type of open source resources for teachers in developing countries and other places where they need access to additional training, right? So just and then doing that as a collaborative, not as you know, we're coming in to tell you what to do. I can't stand that either. We're in this all together. It's a collaborative. It's everyone.
So everyone who just joined, because people came midway in your sentence, the groups came back, but she was speaking about the our next event in Breckenridge.
Next June.
You'll be getting some more information about that. I want to make sure we can get through with our group. So you'll have about
Rebecca.
1 minute. That's okay. And then we'll talk more about Breckenridge at the end. But if group number 1, or this first group, if this is your slide, if you can maybe share, somebody can share out, and you have about a minute or so. Anyone recognize the slide?
I don't think we noticed which group we were going into.
I share for this group. This is the group with
That's
Dr.
not our
Walker.
group, I don't think.
Okay, it's Jug News group, it looks like.
Yeah, this is the group with Dr. Walker, and we just went around and everybody shared some tips. I think the big ones that stood out were the power of providing flexible seating so the kids can move and focus, the building relationships and trust, and then the training from top down and bottom up, both ways. So those were the 3 that kind of stood out. There are several other strategies on there.
Thank you so much, Jagnu. And then we have, I think this was Nicole and yes, Dr. Selways.
Okay, so we talked about working with families and empowering them is one of the most important things we can do. They're our best allies. And a lot of parents don't know the history of parental advocacy and parents, you know, arguing for the rights of their children to have access to education. So teaching them about that, starting with positive phone calls and messages with parents. And then some parents are shy about asking for services their child is entitled to. Some parents don't want their child's disability known to others. Parents often deny when teachers tell them their child has a disability and become defensive. And so the social angle or cultural context is really important to consider. The word disability carries a lot of weight for parents, so we should frame it instead in a way that we're working with parents in a helpful way instead of a judgmental way. And rather than inform parents about their child, who knows their child best, we should say, this is what I'm noticing. What are you noticing at home? And then really start to create a dialogue and start to build trust with that parent or family. And then committing to walk beside them and finding resources is really important too.
Thank you so much. And whoops, jumping ahead. And then our last group, Dr. Rabunga's group.
So I did the typing, but would someone else like to share some of the things that I've written, or Rabbi, would you like to do that, or would you like me to go through it?
I guess I'll go ahead and just, these are some of the things we shared. So we happen to have 2 other people in our group that kind of, we have a similar background, Dr. Chiari and what was the other person? But anyway, we're all in agreement that although we're talking of inclusion and giving, you know, the proper instruction, as a continent, in many places, we are still far behind. The physical barriers is an issue. And so that has to be something that needs to be dealt with before we even can talk about the inclusive support in the way that benefits the students both emotionally, academically, and government support that is really lacking, and it's something that needs to happen. I don't know how we can advocate for that, but for any of these inclusive practices to be effective and to actually to be realized, we do need the support from the government, and whether that is there or not, it's not seen in the places that's supposed to be seen, and that is on the ground where teachers need support. So the willingness to share among educators and stakeholders, just sharing information across. We also talked about recognizing the differences between actually helping the students and the severe mental, in the sense that people with disabilities, or students with disabilities, they don't need our sympathy. What they need is support and tools to make them thrive and succeed, and getting away from that savior mentality and actually adapting skills to help them would really be a long way to go. And there's one of our members in the group shared, he's in Canada, and he shared where Canada has to go by 2025, that all schools will be inclusive, and having that differentiating between equity and quality, and knowing that what is equal is not necessarily good for everybody, and it just might require that students who are struggling need a little bit more push or support to level the playing field, and that sense of belonging being really critical. So that those are some of the things that we talked about. But on the other side, we have, you know, the advocacy, family, community outreach, and technology, which other groups discuss also, and what we discussed in the main discussion.
Thank you so much. All right, well, you'll all have access to this and continue to access. If anyone has any more, feel free to share with us. Come to our summit. Mary, did you want to make a plug for DISES?
Yes. I also want to thank everyone for their participation. Our presenters, our speakers were awesome today, and really inspired so much dialogue from us. And I know we could have probably gone on all day, and perhaps we will continue the conversation through WhatsApp or other means. But I did want to highlight a few things in our last minute or so. First of all, if you're not familiar with our website, please go to our website, listed there. We're on social media. Join us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, Instagram. We're constantly posting, again, thanks to Rebecca and Rabbi, we're constantly posting information about our events and other important information to keep us connected. It's all about being connected and collaborating. We have two important events that we'd like to highlight. We're so excited, as was just mentioned at the beginning of the discussion when I got in on it, our DISES Global Leadership Summit, which it's an international event, but it will be held in beautiful Breckenridge, Colorado. Beautiful scenic views, June 27th and 28th next year. We have the call for proposals. They are due on, and there's a link there, they're due November 1st. And early bird registration will be up around mid-November. So we really encourage you to join us there for more dialogue and conversation in a beautiful, informal setting, having lots of conversations. This will be in roundtable format for those of you who have been with us before. I know Ash and Cheryl and Keisha and lots of you who are on the call, Evelyn, have been with us before in these settings, and you'll find that there's many, many opportunities for conversation and collaboration in an informal setting that's very, very inspiring. And if you have an opportunity, and if you're planning to attend the CEC conference in January, that's January 16th to 19th in beautiful Orlando, or at least sunny Orlando. We have most of our DISES events turn out to be on Monday, the 17th. I just want to highlight that we have a DISES showcase, also a panel of our own members sharing their experiences and the impact that they've had around the world. That's at 9:15 in the morning. We don't have exact times for these, but I did put the tentative times for our business meeting, and that's again on Monday at 4. And then, of course, our reception, where we have other opportunities for informal networking and getting together later that evening. But we'll get the final schedule out and post it on our website and keep you up to date. But we'd love to see all of you and continue these conversations in Orlando and Breckenridge, if not online before that. So again, I thank you all, and I ask you to join us in any way you can, virtually or in person. We really look forward to it. Thank you for your participation today.
Thank you. And the final thing we'll ask, as I put this in the chat, I'll put it in again. We do have a feedback form. This will really help us guide future events. And so your feedback really is appreciated. Your time this morning is appreciated. Thank you so much for our absolutely wonderful panelists. And I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful day.
And we hope to see you in Orlando.
Thank you very much.